Hi, and welcome back to Don't Get Me Started with DRMS. And I'm Greta Martin. I'm the litigation director here at Disability Rights Mississippi. And joining me today again is our communications director, Jane Walton. How you doing, Jane?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I would love to have you back.
So I've kind of invited myself back on yet again to pick our illustrious litigation director's brain because she knows the ins and outs of so many disability rights topics. And something that's kind of been coming up lately in the news, there was a big New York Times article about this recently. The National Disability Rights Network put out a statement about this recently. There's just kind of been a lot of motion in the news. Kind of a trending topic is service animals. So this is, like I said, something that's been in the news, but something we haven't really, touched on. It's kind of, I know people have a lot of questions about what exactly is a service animal. What about an emotional, what is the difference between all of that stuff? So I thought it would be a great topic for us to kind of chat back and forth about. So
I'm ready.
All right. So first things first, let's get some definitions out of the way. What exactly is a service animal?
Okay, so a service animal is going to be an individually trained, specifically trained animal that performs tasks or does some type of work for a person with a disability. And so your most common reference to this is going to be your seeing eye dog. Seeing eye dogs, of course, assist people with visual impairments, but there are actually many tasks and different services that a service animal can provide for a person with disability. Everything from a dog that can assist someone with a hearing impairment, someone that can assist someone who has seizures. They can alert them to seizures and kind of help protect them when they, have a seizure. And there's even, service dogs that kind of alert people to take prescribed medication. So someone with a mental illness, they have to take a prescription every day, same time. You can train a service animal to be that reminder. When most of us use our phones, but some people require the use of a service animal. So it's kind of neat the things that they can do. Now, the Americans with Disabilities Act, that's kind of where we go for the governing law on what a service animal is. However, many states, including Mississippi, have taken to adding to that kind of. Mississippi's is actually a little more limiting.
Okay.
But it's called the Mississippi Support Animal Act. And like I said, it does have a little bit more limiting language than the ADA, but most covered entities, which we'll kind of talk about I'm sure later, have to follow both state and federal law. So your ADA is still going to come into play.
Gotcha.
But people do have to be aware that states have laws that consider support animals and service animals as well.
Okay, so it can vary, but that's a good kind of flyover.
Yes.
And really, it is so amazing what these service animals can do for the people that they serve.
Yes.
And you don't think about like a medication reminder, how cool that is.
Yes.
So now, can you kind of contrast that service animal with what an emotional support animal would be?
Okay, so your emotional support animals are another type of assistance animal, but they're not a pet, much like a service animal, but they provide more of a therapeutic benefit to their owners or handlers. Now, this is not an animal that's going to be specifically trained to do a task or perform a service, so they come with more limitations than an actual service animal does under the ADA. So emotional service animals provide comfort. And so there's actually kind of a third prong of assistance animals, and that is your comfort/therapy dogs. And so these two types of animals are very similar. They just provide, just the nature of them being with their owner or handler provides that therapy, that therapeutic comfort that somebody might need given their disability or even just, different personality disorders and traits. Some people require the use of an emotional support animal or a therapy dog.
Yeah.
So therapy animals, they provide that healing contact. So you've probably seen them. They lots of therapy dogs go into hospitals, especially children's hospitals, to kind of provide a distraction from their sometimes extreme treatments and all that hospital stuff that lots of kids have to deal with when they're in those, have those illnesses. But both of these types of animals, while they're used for a therapeutic purpose or even medical purposes, they're not considered service animals. They're very different. And in that same vein, the ADA does not grant the same kind of access to these animals as they would an actual service animal. But something to note that actually I think a lot of people forget is that the ADA does make a special exception for what's called a psychiatric service animal. And sometimes those service animals can be confused with an emotional support animal.
Right.
And so truly you just have to look back to the ADA definition of this animal is trained to perform a specific task or service.
Right. And so that's kind of lately what has been in the news is airline restrictions with their limiting certain types of emotional support animals. I think now a lot of airlines are saying, the only type of emotional support animal you can have is a dog. Mm-hmm. We've all seen the news stories of someone bringing a peacock to the airport and saying it's my emotional support animal. So that's kind of why this has all been kicked up, is some restrictions of emotional support animals, not service animals, on airlines. So in that vein, generally, where are service animals allowed to be?
So under Title 2 and 3 of the ADA, places that service the public. So that could be businesses, state and local government facilities, places like that. They have to allow individuals to bring their service animals in all areas where the public are allowed to go. So, I think, a lot of places, a lot of examples you'll see where issues pop up are hospitals. Mm-hmm. For example, a patient who has a service animal, is that service animal allowed to go with them in an ambulance? Yes. Is that service animal allowed to be in the patient's room? Yes. But is that service animal allowed in the operating room when the doctor has them under anesthesia? No. So that kind of gives you an idea of where, the public is allowed to go versus the public would be restricted. But at all times, no matter where the service animal is, the owner has to have a control over them. Mm-hmm. So that means that they have to be harnessed or they have to be tethered. But if that harness or tether some way impedes the task or service they are to perform, then the owner can utilize voice or hand signals. So it doesn't have to be a leash, but, they have to be able to control them. And in very few instances can the owner allow the dog to go out of their line of vision.
Gotcha.
So there's a few exceptions to that. For example, if a veteran who has PTSD utilizes a service animal just to kind of assess the surroundings for him or her, they can allow the dog to go into the room they're about to enter, to precede them, but they have to immediately come in once the dog has given the all clear.
Gotcha. Which, everything you're saying, it just goes right on back to reasonable accommodations.
Right.
None of this is a far-fetched thing to be asking for. I would say, as someone who, does not have a service animal, I can see that it's very reasonable. Okay, your dog doesn't need to be in the surgery room for a number of reasons, but it's extremely reasonable to have your service animal ride in an ambulance with you, etc.
Right. And in that same regard, the service animal cannot be disruptive either. Right. So a good example of this, there was actually a case, the circuit leaves me, but a student who utilized a service animal was suing his or her university about their service dog being brought into the lecture hall. Mm-hmm. The issue is that the professor found the dog repeatedly barked. Now, if the dog was barking to alert someone, hey, this individual's having an issue or doing, that's part of its task,
right,
then that would have been different. But if the dog is disruptively barking throughout a lecture or some equivalent event, then that's going to be considered disruptive, and that individual and his or her service dog can be asked to vacate the premises.
But I guess that goes back to these dogs, in a reasonable setting, they are very well trained, so it's going to be very rare that you're going to have a service animal that's being disruptive.
Yes.
And again, all goes back to just reasonable helping people with disabilities do tasks like anyone else.
Right.
So let's do some fun rapid fire questions regarding service dogs and the ADA. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. What kind of animals can be service animals?
So, as of March 2011, only dogs are recognized by the ADA for purposes of being a service animal. Now, I know there are other animals that can be trained as service animals. I know there's a plethora, like you mentioned, of emotional support animals that have been presented. But as for animals that are covered under the ADA, specifically mentioned by the ADA, the only animal is a dog.
Interesting.
Yes.
All right. So, are service animals, service dogs, in training considered service animals? So if they're undergoing their training to be a service animal, are they yet a service animal under the ADA?
No. They have to be fully trained before they can be utilized in public as a service animal.
So, on that note, must a service dog be professionally trained? What does that look like, getting trained?
They do not have to be professionally trained. So people with disabilities have the right to train their dog themselves.
Okay.
They're not required to use a professional dog training service.
So they must be trained, but they do not have to be professionally trained.
Correct.
Interesting. If it is not apparent, what can an entity ask with regards to whether a dog is a service animal or not?
Okay, so if there is not a harness or a leash or some kind of vest that is apparent, and of course, obviously, like I mentioned before, seeing eye dogs, they obviously perform the task that they are, trained to do.
Right.
But if it's not apparent, staff or employees at covered entities can only ask 2 questions. And one is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? That's a yes or no question.
Right.
The second one is, what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? So that's not a yes or no question, but all the individual has to state is, he alerts me to seizure. He alerts me to take my medicine. It can be a very short and simple phrase.
Right.
So employees cannot ask for proof or documentation. They cannot ask you what your disability is or what your symptoms are, or anything about your medical diagnosis, and they cannot ask you to make the dog perform. So if they say, please show me that task, you do not have to do that. You have to tell them what they do for you, but you do not have to make your service animal perform for whoever's inquiring.
Gotcha. And interesting, they can ask what they do, but you still, in that response, you do not have to disclose your disability.
No.
So, again, you mentioned, if a service animal maybe doesn't have a patch or vest or something on, that might be what prompts the question. Does a service animal have to wear a vest or a patch or a special harness that identifies them as a service animal?
No, they do not. So that is not required by the ADA for them to have a special vest or ID tag or a specific kind of harness. Many people with disabilities believe it to be easier to go ahead and have that emblem or have some kind of,
preemptive.
Yes, just preemptively taking care of the questions, but they are not required to have that.
Okay. So, this is an interesting question because I can't think of the last time I went through a self-service food line because of COVID.
Right.
But, say we're in 2019 or we're a year in the future and you're at a salad bar, buffet, self-service food line. Can a person bring a service dog with them as they go through that line?
Yes. So service animals have to be allowed to accompany their handlers to and through self-service food lines, like a salad bar. They can't be prohibited from communal food preparation areas, like if someone is in a dorm and there's a shared kitchen. Of course, the individual can be accompanied by their service dog. Another issue, and I believe, again, I don't have a case to cite this, but I remembered reading an example of a homeless individual bringing their service dog to a shelter. And so the dog was allowed and should be allowed to go through the food line, stay with them, in the common areas. So, yes.
Gotcha. Now, again, we're getting out of our COVID bubble. We're ready to travel. What about hotels? So if a hotel is not pet friendly, do they have to allow a service animal, or can they charge a fee for a service animal?
Okay, so despite a hotel's no pet policy, service animals are the exception to that rule always.
Great.
So hotel guests who require the use of a service animal, they do not have to be restricted to pet-friendly rooms. Let's say the hotel is pet-friendly and they have designated rooms. Well, they do not, this is not a pet, so they do not have to be restricted just to that selection of rooms. And then hotels are not able to charge individuals with service animals a pet fee of any kind, even if that's their pet policy. And the only exception to that rule is if the service animal causes damage to the room. So, scratch marks or, bites or whatever. But again, specifically and specially trained service animals will not do that. So that is the only exception to the fee rule.
Right. And, keep reminding myself they are not pets. This is just, keep repeating that line of they are not pets. Yeah. Okay, so would a church or another place of worship be required to allow a service dog into their facilities?
No. So that is the exception to where service animals are allowed. So we kind of spoke a little bit about, public accommodations falling under the ADA, and that's what's known as covered entities. So religious institutions and organizations fall outside of that because they're exempt from the ADA. So that is those are private religious institutions and organizations. Now, some state laws can, kind of fix that. That does not happen here in Mississippi.
Right.
But generally speaking, service animals may not be allowed in your church unless you have some special arrangement with your congregation and your church leadership, or if they have some policies that allow you to do that. But the ADA does not grant that access.
So it would just be place by place, which is interesting. I was surprised to hear your answer to that because there's one woman at my church that has a service animal with her every Sunday. So it's not to say you can't have one there.
That's right.
It's just not
most churches. Churches, I believe, would absolutely understand that. You just may have to provide a little bit more information than you would under the ADA. So you may have to go to your church leadership, ask for special permission, but by federal law, they are not required to allow your service animal in.
Gotcha. So, do city ordinances that require dogs to be vaccinated, registered, and licensed also apply to service animals?
So, yes. And there's a little caveat to that. So, individuals that have service animals are not exempt from local animal ordinances. So, if you live in a city that requires you to have a vaccinated, registered dog, and they require all dogs to be vaccinated, registered, licensed, whatever, then absolutely your service animal would fall into that. Now, a city cannot have a special registration for service animals. So if their policy is, no, we do not require everybody to be all dogs to be registered and licensed unless you have a service animal, then that would be in violation of the ADA.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay, so say I have a dog and I want my dog to be certified as a service animal, and I go online and I find this website that says I can buy this document and it says my dog is a certified service animal, and I want proof. I want to be on the up and up. I don't want anyone asking me any questions. Should I buy this document? Is this required?
It's not required. Now, should you buy it? I mean, it's kind of like the harness and the ID tag, right? If you want something that you can present to people to kind of preempt any questions, that's great, but you could also just print one off on your computer.
I was about to say, that sounds like something you could do on Microsoft Word, and somebody is getting your money on the internet.
Right, right. There is no organization or licensure requirement through the ADA or through the Department of Justice. Now, you're going to see lots of individuals and organizations that sell these, $20, $30, they're all over the internet. But these documents are not going to convey any rights under the ADA, and the Department of Justice does not recognize them as proof that the dog is a service animal. So you don't need it. So save your $20.
Right.
Or just make something fun on Canva. Or that's going to have the same effect.
Right.
I would suggest, and I have suggested to some of our clients who have called with service animal issues, if you're going to spend the $20 or $30 to some organization for a meaningless piece of paper, just go buy a special harness or vest for your animal so that you can preemptively avoid any questions.
Right.
You're not required to, but if you're going to spend the money anyway, just spend it on something that is a little bit more recognizable, and you've actually, you put some money behind it. I mean, you don't want to just go and buy a piece of paper that's completely useless.
Yeah.
Right.
So either go buy an identifying material or use that $20 and make a donation to your preferred disability rights organization.
Exactly.
So, okay, that concludes our rapid fire. Any, final parting thoughts on service animals? Have there been any service animal cases that have been noteworthy for you over your career? Anything, to kind of end on?
Yeah, so there's kind of two areas that we haven't touched on in any of the questions that are important, but we could literally spend an extra 30 minutes on each of them. One you kind of touched on, and that's the air travel with regards to service animals and emotional support animals. And again, there's a lot to it. The thing to remember is when you're in the airport, when you're in the terminal, when you're walking up the runway, you're covered by the ADA. But when you step on the aircraft, you're covered by a different set of laws. And they're a little bit different than the ADA. They're similar. But it's the Air Carrier Access Act, I believe.
Right.
So to look there, with regards to a service animal, it's pretty much the same thing. The airlines can ask you questions. I think there might even be one more question they can ask you. They have to allow your service animal on the airplane. I mean, the whole idea of the Carrier Access Act is to protect the rights of people with disabilities, just like the ADA, but you're on an airplane. Now, with emotional support and therapy animals, again, because they do not have the ADA access and they're not covered under the ADA, the Carrier Act also doesn't give them special privileges. You can bring them on board, but an airline can require you to provide documentation for those animals, and they can ask for it up to 48 hours before your flight. So if the best thing I can tell people with a service animal or emotional support or therapy dog when they're going to take, a flight is communicate with your airline.
Right.
Bring the documentation you need if you have an emotional support or therapy animal, because they're not as covered by the ADA as service animals. And even if you do have a service animal, just make sure that you've communicated that to your airline and they know they're coming. Now, with regards to airports and terminals, they do have to provide a place for service animals and emotional support animals for like relief areas. And you can request that the airline staff escort you to that spot, so you don't have to be hunting around for a place for your dog once you get off the plane. So there's a lot more to air travel and animals. And whether you have a disability or a service animal or not, I mean, just flying with an animal, communication with the airline is key. And so when it's a special animal like what we've described here today, you really want to make sure you've communicated. And the other special area, just wanted to bring up is housing. Again, here you're kind of duplicating laws here. You've got your ADA and you've got your Fair Housing Act, and both of them address service animals or assistance animals in general. With your Fair Housing Act, they kind of lump everybody, all these animals into one. They call them assistance animals in general. And the key there is if you have a service animal, is communicating with your housing provider. And as long as you put in your request that your service animal be allowed to join your housing, as long as you provide the supporting documentation. So there you would need to make sure that you have, just a doctor, just like we do with reasonable accommodations, right? It's just a physician letter. And you can show that this does not provide a direct threat, fundamentally alter, or substantially change the property. If you can hit those 3 requirements, then more often than not, any type of assistance animal is going to be allowed in housing that falls under the Fair Housing Act. So with regard to housing that does not fall under the Fair Housing Act, it's kind of the same but different. You're going to definitely have protections under the ADA, but you're going to want to communicate right up front with your landlord. And if your landlord or your property manager has a no pets policy, a service animal would absolutely be an exception, but an emotional support animal may not.
Right.
So I think at the end of the day, the biggest takeaway is service animals have a lot more protection than emotional support animals, and that's not to in any way put a negative light on emotional support animals or therapy animals. They have a wonderful place in therapeutic and medical treatment.
Right.
You just have to do a little more homework if your animal is considered emotional support or therapy.
Right.
Whereas with service animals, you have a little bit more access. You're granted a little bit more permissions under the ADA.
Right. And yeah, again, it's, we're not knocking emotional support animals in any way, not diminishing the work that they do. But I think, just even in name, you've got a service animal that is, performing an essential, service to this individual so that they can, carry on their day-to-day activities. And then, a support animal. And so, it kind of, I guess, makes sense.
And I think if I could add one more thing, just as the last point, and I know I'm a dog person. I have 2 at home. I believe that puppies just make things so much better.
They're the best,
exactly. I have thought that since I was very young. But if you see a service animal in a public place or out anywhere, your children, do not touch the service animal.
Right.
I know it is hard. It is hard not to want to pet every beautiful, beautiful dog, but specifically service animals, they are on the job.
Yes.
They are working. They are not
pets.
Right. They are not pets. Now, it's different with emotional support and therapy animals. The handler might permit you to touch or pet, especially therapy animals, right? Yeah. That's part of what they do. They go into these hospitals, they go into these clinics, and they provide comfort. Yeah. But with a service animal, do not touch unless you have very directly and specifically been instructed by the handler that you can do so. Right. That is essential. That's like, I told someone the other day, it's like going up and like flattening the tire of somebody's wheelchair. You would not do that. So, right. And that is their mobility aid. That is their tool that they use to transport themselves.
You think about these very serious services they're providing,
Right.
You don't want to distract this serviced animal from recognizing symptoms of a seizure coming on or anything. That they're performing a job. Yes. I think,
they're a very cute, cuddly tool for this person to use to survive and to enjoy life and be outside, and they depend on that animal. And so you can't, I see it mostly with children, right? Mm-hmm. Children just cannot help themselves. I saw a YouTube video the other day of a little girl trying to pet a seeing eye dog, and the video was to instruct people about how this is not something you should do. You should teach your children that if it is a dog in a public place, more often than not, it's going to be a service animal. Right. So to make sure that the child doesn't immediately go over to touch it, absolutely ask for permission. You're probably going to be told no, but to understand that it's because that animal is providing a service that's very important to that person.
And we so often talk about here, people with disabilities have the right and to live full, meaningful lives and be included in their communities and in all areas of life. And these service animals are so crucial in that. And people with certain disabilities, they enable them to have these meaningful lives and to participate in the public sphere. And so no petting the service animals,
Don't pet
please.
Service animals. Yes, please. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for providing all of your wealth of information on this topic. Again, like I said, this isn't something that, this isn't something that comes up a lot, but it has been a topic of conversation lately. And, people might not know when they're out and about, they just want to pet the dog. So
Yes.
Very, very important topic here. So if you as an individual or an employer or a business owner or anyone have questions regarding service animals, please feel free to reach out to DRMS. Our contact information will be in the show notes. It's also always available on our website, drms.ms, or you can find us on social media at disrightsms. So visit our website. You can give us a call, shoot us an email, reach out on social, and we'd love to answer any questions or provide guidance on the do's and don'ts when it comes to the use of service animals and emotional support animals.
So until next time, everybody, I'm Greta Martin with Jane Walden with Disability Rights Mississippi, and we are just getting started. The information provided during this episode does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. All content provided by Disability Rights Mississippi on this podcast is for informational purposes only.